All right, hey, welcome, folks. Mil-Spec Ops Mickey here. Listen, yeah, that's me down here in the corner. It's going to be a little bit different than what we typically do. This is not a sit rep. It's not a monkey minute. What I thought I would do, because I'm out of pocket for the next 2.5 weeks, as I may have told you, I'm going to be in Israel, or I am currently in Israel, and I pre-recorded this just so that I didn't go dark for 2.5 weeks. Now, last time I went on a short vacation with my wife and went down to Austin, I put out some video series on the F-35. Of course, the B-52 is near and dear to my heart, just like the F-35, because I have actual hands-on experience with it. Close to 500 flight hours on the B-52 during my time in the U.S. Air Force. And of course, it has been a hot minute. Nonetheless, this aircraft is older than me. It was older than me when I actually started working on it as a crew chief on a B-52. And so, but nonetheless, I just thought I'd take the time just to kind of walk you through a little educational thing. This isn't going to be your normal length. This will be a short one, just to talk a little bit around the B-52. I want to do a quick series on the B-52, the B-1, and the B-2. And so today we're going to do the B-52. Now, it gets its name, the Stratofortress is what it's known for, and that's because it is a high-altitude bomber that was designed to fly up in the stratosphere. Now, it has another name, which they call it the Buff, which is, it's informal. It's not the official name. Stratofortress is the official name. But the Buff is actually big, ugly, fat fella. Or for those salty folks that are out there, it is a colorful name, big, ugly, fat. Yeah, I won't say that word, but nonetheless, just putting it out there so you know you are, well-rounded in what this thing is really called and known for. Okay, all right, so let's move on. Okay, so this aircraft actually is produced by Boeing. It is an American long-range subsonic jet-powered strategic bomber. Boeing continues to provide support and upgrades to this day to this aircraft, so it's still in service and in our fleet, very active. Currently operated primarily by the United States Air Force, although NASA does fly one of these. I don't know what they do with it, but nonetheless, the Air Force is your primary flyer of this one, just like the F-22. Nobody else flies it. All right, the bomber is actually capable of carrying 70,000 pounds of weaponry. Those are both external pylons as well as internal. And then, of course, it's got a combat range of around 8,800 miles, and that's without air refueling. Okay. Now, it started its first flight. Actually, it was on the drawing board in June of 1946. And the original A model, or the prototype, was actually designed as a straight wing, 6 turboprop engines. Looks a lot like the Bear, if you know the Soviet rendition of that. And then we changed gears. It looks like the Soviets stuck with it because that's what they fly today. But it changed gears, and now we actually have it as an 8-engine turbojet with a swept wing. Those wings actually are what they would refer to as, I guess it's considered a wet wing, meaning it has fuel in the wings all the way from the center all the way out to the tips. It has 2 external wing tanks, I think, hold about 500 gallons of fuel on the externals. But it'll hold 310,000 pounds of fuel, which, if you convert that roughly, 6 pounds per gallon, that's a pretty heavy load. Of course, it carries fuel along in the forward, the center, and the aft tanks as well. So it's basically a flying fuel tank. It also, like I said, has air refueling capability. The wingspan on this bad dude is 185 feet tip to tip, and those wings actually flex around 20 feet, I think, in either direction on the tips, which is kind of a crazy look. If you've ever, well, you haven't been, most of you, but I will tell you from the cockpit view when you're flying, the wings actually, they kind of go up. It's kind of a trip to see them flexing like they do. If you look at the side of the fuselage of a B-52, you'll notice that it's got wrinkles all the way down it. That's because of the wing flex. The aircraft, again, air refueling capability, it holds the world record for flight time, I believe, at 45 hours of flight. Now, it has a crew of 6, but can hold up to 10. And we'll kind of go through those right now just so you kind of understand where everybody sits and why it can expand from 6 to 10 so easily. Now, everybody today in today's platform sits up in the front. The only difference would be in the original design and model, the gunner, just like the old bomber aircraft in World War II, the tail gunner sat in the very tail of the aircraft. So he'd actually go through what he called the hell hole, all the way through a little tiny catwalk that went all the way from front to back to get into his position. They lost a lot of them in Vietnam. And when they got to the D model, they actually took them out of the tail and brought them into the front cockpit with the other crew members. Okay. Now, started out as a part of the Strategic Air Command, and then it got transferred over to Air Combat Command, and then since is now over to the Air Force Global Strike Command, which is all of the bomber fleet. That's the B-1s, B-2s, B-52s. But nonetheless, you get a pilot, a co-pilot, and then if you go back about 10 feet in the upper deck of the B-52, you've got a electronic warfare officer and a gunner. The gunner position went away in 2017, so I don't really know what sits there now because it's been a hot minute since I've been in them. And then if you go downstairs to the lower deck, you have the bomb nav and the navigator. Those two guys are actually facing forward. They have no windows. They sit in the dark. And if you knew the mission, given the fact that it went from a high altitude to low level, they get bounced around quite a bit down in the lower deck. Now, we talk about the extra crew members. There is a seat, what they call instructor pilot, that sits in the front, right between the pilot and co-pilot. You can literally reach out and touch those guys. That's where I cut my teeth. Most of my flight hours were sitting in the IP seat, which is the best seat in the house, in my opinion. Now, the next one back, if you go back about 6-8 feet behind the pilot and co-pilot, as you head towards the electronic warfare officer, there is a seat called the honey bucket, and that is basically the toilet. And it doesn't get used very often. If it does get used, it's not it's frowned upon by the rest of the crew members. And yeah, they're usually not too happy about somebody using the honey bucket in flight. Okay. But the flights are very long, so most of the time people have to use a bathroom. Okay, so you've got a honey bucket that sits one man. If you go down stairs to the bomb nav location, there is a seat right there next to what they call the pee can. The pee can is actually the pee can. It's a urinal can, and it is as old as the aircraft and has a lot of little things about it that are not so favorable. The flaps typically don't work on this thing, and the brackets typically break. And so when you're in a low-level environment, sitting in the dark, it's very hot. The bomb nav and the navigator typically will get urine splashed upon them, and they also smell that the entire time. So it's a worst seat in the house if you had to sit down there, to say the least, okay? Not only that, but you're getting bounced around quite a bit. So all right, so we go back upstairs to the top level, and the 10th man is actually in a hammock. That's where a flight crew member can actually sleep, and that's so that they can rotate for those longer flights, okay? So that kind of covers the crew member size, and we talked about the weapons load and everything else. This is, again, a nuclear-capable aircraft, and it has a lot. At one point during the Cold War, these aircraft were up 24/7. They'd have airplanes, the B-52 up around the clock somewhere over the world, if not several of them. But the original number built, this is kind of staggering. You think about this, over a 10-year span, 1952 to 1962, 744 of these were built. Today, there's only about 58 that are currently being active and operated. Most of them are the 2nd Bombardment Wing and the 5th Bomb Wing. And then, of course, there are 18 of them, and I didn't know this. This is kind of crazy, that are flown by the reserve forces. That's the 307th Bomb Wing. So kind of a crazy deal to think that you got reservists flying these things. They expect this aircraft to actually fly and serve into the 2050s, which I can't get my head around, right? I don't think we'll be here till the 2050s, but nonetheless, this airframe, it'll actually be 100 years old. So they think this thing's going to last 100 years. So pretty crazy to say the least. Now, it did fly a lot of missions in Vietnam. We lost a lot of them. I think there were over 30 aircraft that were shot down in Vietnam. In fact, one of my old bosses, one of the first guys I worked for at Lockheed Martin, was actually a bomb nav that got shot down in Vietnam and spent about 8 months in the Hanoi Hilton during the same time that No Name McCain was there. So nonetheless, we lost quite a few, lost a lot of gunners too as well. And so you did see this aircraft come back into to some action right after 9/11 when we went over and started bombing the Tora Bora Mountains, where Osama bin Laden was hiding out. They thought he was hunkered down inside those mountain complexes that the Taliban was using, and so or Al Qaeda. And so we bombed the daylights out of those with what they call bunker buster bombs. All right. And then also, besides the 2001 stuff going after Osama bin Laden, we actually reutilized this thing in the Desert Storm, which is 2003, where this thing was a real workhorse in that arena. And so responsible for basically taking out the lights in Baghdad, right? So B52, like I said, been around a very long time, and it will continue to be. So now let's talk about the air refueling aspect of it. Again, when you think about this thing, it has a wingspan of 185 feet across, and then it's 195 feet long. To see that thing come in to be air refueled is quite remarkable, from both the inside the refueler as well as inside of the B52. It just makes everything look small. It's just a crazy thing. And I can remember times when we would be literally in formation with 8 B-52s all waiting to come in into these air refuelers. It was quite the sight. Got some amazing pictures from those days of that. And again, the after the Vietnam War, this aircraft actually went into a different profile, and they started flying at low level. Now, when you think about this, as I mentioned, when you've got a wingspan of 185 feet and you get an aircraft that size down into a low-level environment, they're flying those aircraft below 100 feet in the mountains, which is that is pretty dang low. I can recall times when we were down in canyons looking up at buzzards as we flew past them. I also can recall times that where we've been hit by lightning, and I've watched fireballs come out of panels, cockpits full of smoke. We've lost engines. We've had bird strikes. I actually have seen a B-52 take a bird strike with a buzzard that actually went in through the cockpit window, which is pretty staggering to begin with because it's very thick glass, and actually injured the pilot. And you can imagine getting hit over 500 mile an hour by a bird. It is not pleasant, needless to say, especially when there's glass involved, and yeah, not good. And then also I've seen them come back with the boom from an air refueler sticking out, so it looked like a unicorn. Pretty crazy thing, but again, very robust aircraft and very reliable aircraft. If you look at the flight hours and what this thing costs to fly compared to other platforms, just to give you kind of a general idea, if you look at the B1, for example, cost per flight hour, it's $63,000 to fly that. If you look at the B2, it's $135,000 per flight hour. And so these are some very long flights when these things go up. So you can imagine the cost to operate that. A B-52 cost is $72,000 per flight hour. That's more than the B1, but it's not nearly as much as the B2. Again, these things are workhorses, and they are very expensive to operate and maintain because they are such an old platform. So, all right. So listen, that is going to do it. Hopefully you got something out of this. Like I said, it would be short and sweet. We'll talk a little bit more in the next video on the B1 and then on the B2. And so again, that's it. You guys be safe out there. God bless. I'll see you soon. Monkey out. Check out the latest gear and products at MonkeyWorks US.